A big call to make. CNN announces that we call Florida in the Al Gore column.
Turn the lights down. The party just got wilder.
Florida goes to Mr. Bush.
Bush wins. Headline of the hour. Folks, it might be premature.
So we take Florida away from George W. Bush.
This is no longer an election. This is like Alice in Wonderland.
The one thing no one expected in a presidential campaign is that we wouldn't know who won on Election Day.
Count our votes! Count our votes!
Bush versus Gore was a watershed moment where the curtain was lifted on our election system in the United States, and we realized we've got to do something to fix it. And in some ways, Congress did, but then there were the unintended or possibly intended consequences.
If you are just waking up and just tuning in, you should know that after a long night of swing votes, the presidential race is frankly still too close to call.
On November 8th, Kurt Browning, the supervisor of elections for Pasco County, woke to shocking news.
The vote is now so close between them that there will be an automatic recount.
What are you talking about, recounts? I'm in bed. There's no recounts going on. And literally within 3 hours, we were in the throes of a recount.
The tug-of-war for the presidency is now down to the most local of politics, counties in Florida, precincts in Florida, where the recount has begun.
5A11 is a vote for Gore.
Under intense media scrutiny, the flaws in Florida's system became clear.
Vote-o-matic machines and conflicting rules about ballots and fuzzy rules about what is a vote.
It's slightly detached.
Democrats charge a confusing ballot layout led voters to think they were punching the ballot for Al Gore when they were actually voting for Reform Party candidate Pat Buchanan.
3,500 people did not vote for Pat Buchanan. Come on, this is heavily Democratic Palm Beach County.
It is a ballot that was approved by an elected Democratic official. And hey, guess what? There were no complaints until after the election.
As both campaigns launched lawsuits over the disputed results, accusations of partisanship fueled the tension.
I voted. Whether or not my vote counted, I don't know.
The question of who will be the next president is right on her desk. She's the Secretary of State, Katherine Harris.
As Secretary of State, I am Chief Elections Officer.
Harris was the state co-chair of George Bush's presidential campaign. Today, Governor Jeb Bush said she is doing a good job.
I think she's doing the right thing.
Political insiders say there is no evidence Harris is being manipulated by the Bushes. What I think people didn't realize before 2000 is that the people running the elections had a huge stake in the outcome.
While each campaign battled it out in court, the recounts dragged on.
I make this record. No, you don't need to make a record. I do need to make the record.
We were in the middle of the final recount when somebody's phone in the room rings.
36 days after the election, the U.S. Supreme Court brought everything to a halt.
It does appear quite clear that George W. Bush, the eldest son of a former president, is going to be the president-elect of this country with the 25 electoral votes from Florida.
The court declared that the recounts violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause because there was no uniform standard for counting all ballots.
Good morning.
The overwhelming consensus after 2000 was that our electoral machinery was broken. We did not run elections as well as we should, and we should fix that.
In the fall of 2002, Congress passed a sweeping reform bill, the Help America Vote Act, or HAVA.
For the very first time, the national government will step up to the plate and meet its constitutional duty to uphold the soundness and sanctity of the ballot in this country. This bill would provide almost $4 billion, much of it to individual states, to replace old voting machines, train poll workers, and combat fraud.
The heart of the reform was a promise to improve voting machines, to make the machines work better. That more or less has been kept, but a whole series of new problems were injected.
The bill attempts to address one of my key concerns, and that, of course, is the issue of voter fraud.
Senator Kit Bond led a Republican effort to fight potential fraud by requiring ID from first-time voters who registered by mail.
Senator Bond used to talk about a little dog in St. Louis getting registered to vote named Ritzy Meckler.
I have great respect for the dead, and I love dogs. I don't think either ones should vote.
While HAVA set minimum voting standards, it was up to the states to enact the reforms. And by 2011, many were passing voter ID laws that were tougher than what HAVA required. Florida already had one when Dennis Baxley, then a representative, took office in 2010.
I think voter identification is just a responsible act. If I go to a bank, I expect them to verify and protect my money and make sure I'm the one getting it.
You can't buy a beer, board a plane, or even rent a movie without showing proper ID. But voting? In most states, all you need is a name.
The idea that fraud is a bad thing is appealing to everyone. And so how can you object to fighting it? The complexity comes when you dig beneath the surface and find out there is essentially no such thing as voter fraud, and it is simply a way of making it harder to vote for constituencies that traditionally lean Democratic.
There are people who don't have the voter identification that they want to require, and they are hugely disproportionately African Americans, Latinos, naturalized citizens, and those groups tend to vote for Democrats.
Are they really trying to keep certain people from voting at all?
It became a lightning rod issue as people perceived that we were up to some nefarious project of depriving people of their vote. I couldn't dream of anything farther from the truth. We want it easy to vote and hard to cheat.
Multiple investigations have found little evidence of the widespread voter fraud that ID laws would target, but Republicans say that Democrats are hyping stories of voter suppression.
This is how Democrats try and motivate their voters. They try and keep them paranoid and angry to get them out to the polls.
Wendy Weiser, who tracks election law for the Brennan Center, says it's hard to fully quantify how much voter turnout is being affected. But the 2000 election made it clear that even a few thousand votes can have big consequences.
Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of voters here or there can really determine election outcomes. Politicians saw that small manipulations of the rules of elections can really make a difference.
In the past 2 years, almost every state in the country has introduced or passed some type of change or restriction to the voting laws.
In 2011 in Florida, Curt Browning had become the state's top election officer and saw firsthand what happened when the voting rules were changed.
Governor Rick Scott is expected to sign a bill that would drastically change Florida's election laws.
A Republican-led effort to cut early voting and later purge non-citizens from the voting rolls became national news.
Supporters say the law will prevent fraud, but voters' rights groups say it's a blatant attempt to suppress voting.
I sit here oftentimes when I was an election supervisor saying, why is this so difficult? Why is this so hard? And I will tell you what makes it hard. It's the politics. The candidates are all out to make sure that their voters are getting registered and their voters are voting.
Browning left office before the election, and the new law was blamed in part for long lines at the polls and a vote count that took 4 days.
Florida voters who were in lines up to 7 hours on Election Day say the entire process is embarrassing.
Florida tonight remains too close to call. So where's the good news, you say? Here it is. The election was decided without them.
In the years since Bush v. Gore, the voting wars show no sign of slowing.
This voting system is out of control. You have people, in my opinion, that are voting many, many times.
Stop fear-mongering about a phantom epidemic of election fraud.
Since 2013, nearly 24 states have enacted new voting regulations, ranging from purging voter rolls to imposing strict voter ID laws, a trend fueled after the Supreme Court threw out part of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which had protected the rights of minority voters in certain states.
The two biggest drivers of restricted voting laws are partisanship and race. The greater the increase in political participation by minority voters and the greater the Republican control of the state, the more likely the state is to pass laws cutting back on voting rights.
Some states have made it easier to vote with automatic registration and mail-in voting. And in 2020, in response to fears over the coronavirus, many states loosened restrictions on voting by mail. But that quickly became a political piñata.
They're sending millions of ballots all over the country. There's fraud.
No one has established at all that there is fraud related to mail-in ballots.
We can't just rest our entire voting rights in the hands of politicians. Whether their self-interest is expanding voting access or restricting voting access, their motives are not going to be pure.
What people thought Bush v. Gore did was expose a problem that politicians could solve. What in fact it did was it exposed an opportunity that politicians could exploit. And that's really been the most important legacy of Bush v. Gore.